Far from the major fashion centers, while the world is cheering for body freedom, there is a tradition that still exists that defies all norms. Leblouh, a fat-shaping practice that is considered an insurance card for Mauritanian girls entering marriage. But behind that glorified layer of fat are stories that will shock anyone who hears it. For the first time, even find it hard to believe that it still exists in the 21st century. But the question isn't simply whether Leblouh is right or wrong. The real question is, who gets to define beauty? Is it the community? Is it mothers? Or are girls themselves being held to standards they were never consulted about, ever thought beauty was a matter of personal freedom? After learning about Leblouh, you might realize that the truth is not so pleasant.
And what do you think about fat farms and force-feeding women?
I think they're not bad people. They're simply not aware of the consequences of obesity, but little by little more people are discovering it. And it becomes rarer to hear of families who force their daughters to become obese.
Number 1, when beauty covers the truth. In Mauritania, beauty can kill. That's not a metaphor.
It's a months-long process during which you are forced to drink liters of basi. This drink is given to women in the morning. They have to drink it all day until the evening. It's made of camel's milk and millet.
In 2021, the death of a 13-year-old girl months after Leblouh sparked a nationwide debate. But public opinion quickly quieted down as if nothing had happened. Because in the remote countryside, Leblouh was never a problem, just an accepted part of everyday life. When the international media reported the news, many Mauritanians were angry, saying it was a distortion, an insult to a custom that has fed women for generations. To them, girls with thin bodies are pitiful, a sign of poverty, a failure of the family. Therefore, stories like the death of that little girl or the accounts of young victims are just small incidents. In the eyes of adults, a weak voice in the forest of old beliefs. In Nouakchott, the Leblouh backlash began in cramped gyms where urban girls sought to redefine beauty through a healthy, active body. They posted photos of themselves working out on social media and shared videos warning of the consequences of Leblouh. The movement quickly spread among urban youth, but was largely invisible in the countryside. In villages like Tagant or Adrar fat rooms still function as bride training schools, where girls are isolated from the outside world for months at a time. This stark contrast has split Mauritania into two parallel worlds. On one side, urban girls are screaming for bodily autonomy, demanding that society recognize new norms. On the other, mothers still believe that Leblouh is their daughter's ticket to a comfortable life away from poverty and social scorn. Between these two poles lies a vast void where girls who are not yet old enough to make their own decisions become silent victims caught between two worlds. Fatma Sidi Mohammed, founder of the Espoir organization, commented, "Leblouh does not die as quickly as people think. It is quiet, persistent, like hunger, because it is linked to fear. Fear of being poor, of being laughed at, of being excluded from the community." According to her, Leblouh is a genetic obsession, metastasizing from generation to generation, like a kind of social insurance using women's bodies. In recent years, social media has been the only tool capable of shaking up the fat rooms. Stories and images of deteriorating health and death from force-feeding have been spread across Arabic forums, but the spread has been like a thin wind blowing across a vast desert. In the villages, the internet is still weak, and mothers still hold the power in the family. That leaves many young girls, despite having access to new information, still forced to follow old customs in silence and powerlessness. Leblouh is more than just a custom. It is a hidden battle between two generations, two worlds. Two views on women's bodies and dignity. And that is why, while the outside world is condemning Leblouh in Mauritania, the movement to abolish it is still in its infancy. But Leblouh did not appear out of thin air. To understand how such a harsh custom could be so deeply rooted in Mauritania, we need to go back centuries to where it all began with the most basic fears of a nomadic society. Number 2. The origin and transformation of Leblouh through the times. To understand why Leblouh has endured, we have to go back to the 11th century, when Tuareg and Moorish peoples were still migrating across the arid deserts. For them, a plump woman was not only a symbol of beauty, but also a vivid image of plenty of a family that did not have to run after every hunger. In these communities where water is scarcer than gold, a thin woman is synonymous with poverty and failure. Conversely, a large waist is seen as a powerful sign of wealth and prosperity. The fatter the girl, the more respected her family is. When the French arrived in Mauritania in the early 20th century, they brought with them laws, doctrines, and ideas of progress. But Leblouh was outside of all that. It was absent from reforms unmentioned in official documents. Even when slavery was banned, Leblouh persisted silently, as if nothing could touch it. In the Bidan noble families, the fat rooms continue to be maintained as a mandatory ritual. Girls are still sent there, continuing their journey of transforming their bodies into symbols of wealth and family honor. And you may be wondering, why are the great changes outside not affecting a small room where girls are force-fed until their bodies reach the standard? Such is the power of fear passed down from generation to generation. In 1960, Mauritania gained independence. But for many villages, the event was like a wind blowing across the desert, leaving nothing but scattered dust. Leblouh carried on as if the revolution had never happened. And at its height in the 1970s and 1980s, some families went so far as to inject their daughters with appetite stimulants just to get them to the desired weight faster. Imagine when the whole world is talking about women having the right to education and to decide about their own bodies in remote areas of Mauritania, little girls are still being turned into investment projects for marriage and family honor. By 2003, a new wave had begun. The first media campaigns were launched promoting healthy lifestyles and reviving dreams of a more modern Mauritania. But then the murders of French tourists in 2007 seemed to hit a pause button. As the country faced security threats, incidents like Leblouh's were pushed to the bottom of the priority list. Perhaps what makes many people feel choked up is this. Every time Mauritania seems to be about to turn a new page, Leblouh finds a way to squeeze through the cracks, adapt to the times, and take root more firmly in the arid lands both geographically and cognitively. And perhaps you're wondering, does Leblouh persist because of the power of tradition, or because of the vague fears of hunger and poverty that haunt mothers in those villages? In 2008, a coup that returned the country to conservative groups led to a strong return to old traditions, including Leblouh. It is estimated that up to 80% of women in rural Mauritania had experienced Leblouh at that time. In each period, Leblouh took on a different guise, from a symbol of survival to a social norm to a shield protecting family honor. Even as the outside world changed rapidly in the dunes of Mauritania, Leblouh remained a living proof of wealth. History may explain the origins of Leblouh, but it is the social norms that have made it an indisputable norm in the lives of Mauritanian women. And that is the hardest shackle to break. Number 3 standards of beauty in Mauritania. When a girl starts to grow up, the first thing her family looks at is not her academic achievements, her dreams, or her talents, It is her body. Is she curvaceous enough to go to a matchmaking session? In many desert villages, this is not an unusual question. It is the only acceptable question. For the Moorish Bidan communities, a woman's body is more than just a body. It is a measure of the family's honor, and the people responsible for keeping that measure correct are mothers. The fatteners, experienced village women, are still invited into the homes of the girls to help them complete the rites of passage. But for them, fattening is not torture. They see it as a duty, a way to protect their daughters from being looked down upon and forced into unwanted marriages. Many outsiders would immediately think of cruelty, but for Mauritanian mothers, each cup of peanut milk forced upon them is a twisted gesture of love, an implicit promise: you will never go hungry. That is why when they look at their emaciated daughters, they feel more fear than sympathy. You may find it hard to accept, but try to put yourself in that space where stretch marks are not hidden, but cherished as badges of maturity. They are stories mothers pass down to their daughters, as if to say, "I've been there, you will too." But this standard is not only in the home. It seeps into the classroom, into the community, into village meetings. Girls who are not fat enough are ridiculed by their peers, criticized by their teachers. Girls with standard bodies are praised, placed on the priority list for good marriages. In the bustling markets of Mauritania, people still pass around the old saying, "A fat wife is a faithful wife." Sound familiar? Somewhere you may have heard similar sayings, albeit in a different form, in a different culture. And perhaps that is why urban girls who are gradually getting used to the concept of free bodies feel trapped in an invisible war. On one side, social media is full of images of healthy bodies, of active lifestyles. On the other side, there are whispers from family that the body is not good enough, is wrong standard. Between these two worlds, many young girls are frozen. They are no longer sure who their bodies really belong to. And beauty, since when, has become a cage that they are forced to live in, afraid of escaping, but also afraid of being locked up forever. Number 4. The physical and mental price. The bodies of the girls who passed through Leblouh were on the surface celebrated curves, but beneath that skin lay bodies that were tired, weighed down by illnesses that no one in the village spoke of. In Nouakchott, clinics doctors are used to seeing cases of heart disease in younger women. High blood pressure, diabetes, liver, and kidney complications, these are all common in girls who were force-fed by Leblouh from the age of 8 or 9. But the most haunting thing is not the measurable health indicators. It's somewhere else, where medical machines can't reach. These girls grew up in bodies they felt were foreign to them. They talked about looking in the mirror and seeing someone else looking back, not themselves. Perhaps this is something that few outside of Leblouh can fully appreciate, being forced to possess a body you did not choose, and then living in it like a prisoner with his hands tied. And while the world encourages young girls to love their bodies, Mauritanian girls are torn. How can they love their bodies when they are the result of a custom they have no right to refuse? How can they love when every gasp, every climb up the stairs reminds them that their bodies were not built for them? Many girls say that after Leblouh, they no longer feel happy when eating. They eat as a duty, as a test of loyalty to their family. And when images of Western or Nigerian influencers praising healthy, slim figures flood social media, these girls just keep quiet. Because they know that between Instagram and their mother's kitchen, the place that decides their fate is still their mother. You may wonder, why don't they protest? But for them, protesting is not easy, because the obsessions come not only from meals, but also from the eyes of the community, from the fear of being considered an unfilial child. a child who brings shame to the family. In Mauritanian psychology circles, experts call Leblouh a form of psychological violence, a violence that makes girls forget the feeling of ownership of their bodies. There are injuries that leave no scars, no blood, but haunt you for life. Leblouh for many is like that. Number 5. Laws and invisible loopholes. Leblouh is nowhere to be found in Mauritanian law. No prohibitions, no penalties, no specific protections. The chambers of parliament are silent, as if Leblouh is invisible, unworthy of public discussion. Fatma Sidi Mohammed tried to raise the issue at national policy conferences, but she was rebuffed outright. Officials avoided using words like forced fat and instead called Leblouh a family matter, a delicate custom that should not be discussed in public. Sound familiar? Sensitive practices are often placed in a legal gray area where everyone knows it's happening, but no one wants to touch it. No one wants to take responsibility. In the villages, the silence of the law is a shield for families to maintain Leblouh as part of their self-proclaimed heritage. Without a law to prohibit it, they have all the more reason to continue to silence anyone who dares to question it. At the international level, organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Equality Now have repeatedly called on the Mauritanian government to recognize Leblouh's actions as a human rights violation. They have placed it on a par with forced child marriage and other forms of gender-based violence. But in the remote regions, these calls are like voices from a foreign world. International organizations are viewed with suspicion as outsiders who do not understand the Mauritanian fears. And even when a girl dares to stand up and go to the local court, she quickly realizes that the door is more closed than she thought. The lawsuits involving Leblouh are almost unheard of. And everyone understands that in those communities, suing your own family, your own mother, is no different than cutting off your path back to the village. Someone once said that sometimes silence is a form of violence. For the Mauritanian girls imprisoned by Leblouh, the silence of the law is the thickest wall preventing them from escaping. Not everyone is so quiet, though. In the cities, a new generation is challenging Leblouh with the most modern tools at their disposal: social media gyms, public storytelling. Number 6. Impression of beauty. Leblouh may seem like a Mauritania story, but if you pause and look at the bigger picture, you might realize that it is just a small piece of the global picture of beauty standards that have been erected and become a steel cage for women's bodies. In South Korea, young women are living in a different kind of fat room, brightly lit plastic surgery rooms. There, V-line faces, porcelain skin, and big round eyes are not just options, but the default conditions for success and popularity. Do you think there is really a big gap between Leblouh and those surgeries? In Myanmar, the heavy necklaces worn by Kayan women are still a tourist attraction. Many young women there are beginning to question this, but to give up the necklaces would mean losing their identity and their livelihood from tourists. In Africa, beyond Leblouh, customs such as scarification and skin lightening persist in many communities. Each mark left on a woman's body tells a story about honor, status, power, and control. There is a strange commonality across cultures. Women's bodies seem to be the stage for social manipulation. Everywhere. And Leblouh, however harsh, is just another version of the same familiar play. But there is one thing that makes Leblouh particularly cruel. It targets young girls. Girls who are not yet conscious enough to know what they want are forced to accept this norm as an undeniable part of themselves. You could argue that elsewhere at least women have a choice, albeit one that is heavily influenced by society. But in Leblouh, the coercion lies within the home, at the hands of relatives, at the hands of mothers who are expected to protect girls. So when the world talks about body positivity, about the right to love your own body, Leblouh is like a slap in the face to those illusions. It reminds us that in many places loving yourself has never been easy. It is a harsh battle where beauty is not a personal choice, but an invisible necklace passed down from generation to generation. It is Leblouh's extreme strangeness that attracts the eyes of tourists who love to explore the different. But when pain becomes an experience for outsiders who still listens to the girl's true voices. Number 7. Black tourism in Leblouh. In today's world, where the more bizarre and shocking the experience, the more attractive it is, Leblouh cannot escape the curious eyes of adventurous travelers. On dark travel forums, Leblouh is whispered about as an extremely rare destination, a place where people can witness firsthand the surviving ancient customs. You may be surprised to learn that unofficial tours are taking visitors to villages where Leblouh still exists. They organize meetings, arrange force-feeding shows for tourists to film and photograph. Some even stage forced-feeding scenes to please the eager cameras capturing this unique cultural moment. For poor locals, the money from such tours is not small. But for the girls who are put into the role, it feels like having their rights to their bodies taken away once again, this time under the lens of strangers. Many human rights organizations call this the commercialization of pain. And it may be disconcerting to think that for many tourists, the tragedy of these girls is just a cultural experience added to their itinerary. Mauritania has no laws against such tours. Local tourism authorities barely mention Leblouh in their official policies. Even when tourists began to return after the 2007 security turmoil, the government was eager to restore the flow of visitors, whether they came to see the sand or the girls being forced to gain weight. In her travel blogs, Leblouh is told in a tone of admiration, sometimes coldly cruel. Images and personal stories are turned into commodities, into features, removed from the painful context and silent wounds of the people involved. And there, amid the panning cameras, the girls sat still playing their roles. Roles that the community, the tourists, and the rules of silence had arranged for them. Perhaps the most bitter thing is not that they were force-fed, but that their story was told by others in the most glorious, one-sided, superficial way. While the outside world seeks to observe, insiders want to tell their own stories in the most authentic way, from lands where Leblouh is not just a custom, but a wall that prevents them from dreaming of a different life. Number 8. The gray area between two worlds. In Mauritania, there are places where Leblouh is no longer a subject of debate, nor is it a tradition to be proud of. It is simply a deeply ingrained habit, existing as a silent shadow in everyday life. In the remote villages, Leblouh is not discussed. No one speaks its name in the marketplace between meals. It flows through customs wedding seasons, stories told in a tone of indifference. Because people there believe there is nothing to discuss. It is the only way to live properly. To live enough. In the cities, the story was pushed to the other extreme. Leblouh became a hot topic in forums, after-school classes, and gyms. It was called out by name, dissected, and protested. But when the city people tried to speak up, the country people responded with cold silence. It was as if the city girls were talking about another planet, not their Mauritania. Between these two worlds lies a gray area where young rural girls are exposed to social media, aware of new norms but unable to speak up. They understand that even if their hearts are drawn to the images of healthy, free bodies on their phone screens, the outside world, the gaze of their village, their mother, their relatives remains an insurmountable wall. Just think. Living in that gray area is probably more tiring than living in extremes. Because every step, every meal, every look from relatives reminds them, you can dream, but you are not allowed to do it. And it is in that gray area that stories like Leblouh's are framed in a long silence. No one dares to tell them. No one dares to name them. Because to name them is to admit that one is dreaming of a world that does not belong to one. Perhaps that is the most subtle tragedy in Leblouh. Not the whipping, nor the forced meals, but the lingering silence that envelops a generation, caught between two worlds where no one asks what they want. Number 9. Data perspective. In 2025, international health organizations released the latest statistics on Leblouh in Mauritania. While some urban areas have seen a sharp decline in obesity rates, the numbers in rural areas are still startling. It is estimated that around 80% of women in rural Mauritania experience moderate to severe Leblouh, while in large urban areas such as Nouakchott or Nouadhibou, the rate drops to around 10%. These figures reflect not only regional differences, but also a clear generational gap. Surveys show that 70% of rural women over 40 still support Leblouh, believing it to be a ritual to protect their daughters. Meanwhile, only about 10% of urban women under 25 still feel that Leblouh is a necessary part of their lives. On the health front, data from Mauritanian hospitals show that nearly half of all cardiovascular cases in women are related to Leblouhs. Blood pressure, diabetes, liver, and kidney diseases continue to increase in women who experience Leblouh at a young age. Despite efforts by many international and local organizations to bring health education programs to remote areas, the awareness gap remains a major challenge. When the numbers, the stories, the protests add up, Leblouh is no longer just a custom. It is a mirror that shines a light on the obsession of a society caught between tradition and the desire for freedom. Number 10. Invisible sentence hanging on women's bodies. Leblouh is more than a custom. It is a shadow cast over an entire society. A shadow woven from ancient fears, from memories of poverty, of survival, and of being left behind in a world that is changing every day. You might think that today's Mauritanian girls have all the tools to break that shadow. The internet, social media, international movements for women's rights, body rights. But it's not that easy, because in the communities where Leblouh still exists, rejecting it is not just rejecting a custom. It is rejecting the family, the community, the familiar world. So can Leblouh be erased, or will it disappear on its own as the younger generation chooses to live differently? Perhaps that question is not easy to answer. And perhaps what Mauritania needs is not just a massive protest movement, but a space where girls can be heard and make decisions about their bodies without having to fight against the people they love most. Think about it. Is there anything more cruel than being forced to choose between your family and your own body? And who knows, Leblouh's story may also be a mirror for all of us to look back at our own society. Because somewhere in the most modern standards, sometimes women's bodies are still suspended by an invisible sentence without anyone calling it by name. Thank you for patiently accompanying NVL Travel Documentary until the last minutes of today's journey. Stories like Leblouh's not only open the door to a distant culture, but also serve as a mirror for each of us to reflect on things that seem so close. The way we treat our own bodies with the default standards that we sometimes do not realize. If you feel that these exploration trips touch your curiosity, your unanswered questions, please continue to accompany us on the following journeys. Each trip is not only beautiful pictures, but also stories that make us think longer, deeper, about the world, about people, and about ourselves. You can also leave a few lines of your feelings under the video. We always appreciate every opinion from you because it is you who help the forgotten stories to be heard more further. And perhaps the most important thing that Leblouh reminds us today is that sometimes the scariest things are not the visible chains, but the invisible locks we put on ourselves simply because we are so used to them.